Hey everybody, today we've got something of a little different kind of fix the mix. Today I got a track from a good friend of mine who ended up doing some of the recording for this band, Able Days. Grab their EP at abledays.bandcamp.com. The song I'm going to be mixing is Run For Your Life. And I said it was going to be a little different because I didn't actually mix the final version of this. This came out last month, but my friend sent me the tracks to see what I would do with them. So I didn't have an opportunity to listen to the song, the final version, before I mixed my version. So, just to give you a little idea of what their version sounded like versus mine, check it out. And yeah, you can use your eyes if you'd like to as well. So, view with all intents and purposes the final version that they did, not the one I did. Listen carefully.
Words fail to ever really impress us. Doesn't anybody wonder what's behind them? 'Cause we had lots of last words that turned into lost evenings. And now nobody that listens to my story will ever believe me. They say it's not so easy to just run for your life and remain.
So a couple things I noticed about that version of the song, which I didn't have an opportunity to listen to before I mixed it, and I thought that was a really interesting experiment, is that there's a lot of low end, a lot of low mids, very warm sounding. And without knowing what the band was going for, I ended up mixing my version a little bit differently, so to speak, with
Words fail to ever really impress us. Doesn't anybody wonder what's behind them? 'Cause we had lots of last words that turned into
much brighter version. So even though it's not that much louder, I tried to get it closer to the same levels as the original. It's a lot brighter overall, and he liked it. So hopefully you guys do too. The other thing I'll notice is in this version that the original version didn't have is it had a piano track instead of like a Wurlitzer or a Rhodes track. So that in and of itself is creating a much different feel. But those are the tracks I got. So those are the stems I used. And another thing that's really interesting is that the drums don't have a kick track. High tom, low tom, snare top and bottom, and overheads, but no kick. So that influenced my mix decisions a lot. So, starting at the beginning, this is how everything kind of sounded out of the box with the drums first. So the first decision I made was, since there's no kick, I have to focus in on these overheads. First thing I did was EQ'd them with a high pass at about 35 hertz, and then I boosted around 70 hertz so that I could really get a lot of that kick. But then I cut out a lot of the mid-range at about 400 hertz because, as you'll see, there's a lot of that body there. And even though I didn't hear the final version until after I finished mine, I will say that I thought this song was really well suited to darker sounding cymbals. Now, a lot of people I'll see boosting cymbals all the time, but you don't have to. You can honestly just cut some of the more resonant frequencies, cut some of the harshness, and just appreciate the sound of the cymbals for what they are. So, with the EQ, without. You can tell that the kick comes more into focus with a little bit more of a thump, and also the cymbals get a lot less harsh. So it's warmer sounding cymbals. All right, off to a good start. Now, next plugin I have in the chain is CS4, which is by T West, and I like it. I continued to boost some of the low end here, and also low passed at around 10 kilohertz. Now, I know that sounds odd to some people who may not who like a lot of shine in their cymbals, but for this song, I thought the cymbals were actually recorded a little bit harsher than the rest of the kit. So I boosted the low end and monoized it below 100 hertz. So the kick, the low end of it, is now perfectly center under 100 hertz. It's officially mono. Now, with that, you can hear it's making a psychoacoustic difference more than anything else. Warmer and sounds less wide in the low end, less flubby, so it's a little more concentrated. And then after that, I just have a compressor to tighten up the overall sound with a fastish attack of about 12.3 milliseconds, and then a slower release of about 100 milliseconds. So it's an almost pre-transient fullness attack and a release that's audible. And I also increased the mid-range a little bit over here with the mid-scoop knob on Molot, another free compressor, with a softer knee and a ratio of about 3. So I like it much better with that. Without. More dynamic without it, but with it we get a lot more of a full-bodied pop sound almost. So, moving on from the overheads to the snare. Here, I took both the bottom and the top and I'm processing them at the same place in the snare bus. About a boost at 1.5K because a lot of mid-range in this track, so it really needs to stand out. Boosted about 7.8 kilohertz because I needed more pop out of that snare. You know I like my snare pops, boys. And I also have a high pass at about 120 hertz just because I don't want any of that kick flub bouncing into my snare. And a slight boost at about 200 hertz to almost make it feel more resonant. So like a really gentle slope at about 120 and then boost at 200 to make up for some of that lost low end. So it's snare with a lot more body now. More body, more crack. And a slight cut at 500 hertz where there was a resonance, as you'll hear. And then I just compress it using Grain Comp. Now you'll notice I didn't gate the snare because I didn't actually feel that I had to. I'm not compressing it that hard. And in the sense of the mix, it fits to have the sound of the room a lot more wherever I can get it. Because this is really just catching peaks on the loudest notes. Again, faster attack, but this time a faster release, a little bit harder with a hot character. And with that, I go on to the toms. So, funny thing about the toms, they, one of them was gated, the high tom was gated. So, I got the file without being able to gate it myself, and that's totally fine, but then the low tom was not gated on its own, so I only had to gate one of them. But not wanting to use extra processing power, I just went through and manually edited the track to fade out and mute wherever I felt was necessary. Especially with long periods of tom usage like this. So, what did I do to get these toms up to snuff? Well, I cut out a lot of that low end again, below 60 hertz. I pumped up the low end above it at about 92 hertz with a wider Q so that I could get some of the low end out of that tom. because I really wanted to sound beefy. And then I cut out a lot of the mid-range of the toms, and I boosted the 4.7 kilohertz just so I could get a little bit more stick hit out of it. Same with about 8 kilohertz. Now, you'll notice that later on in the song, I actually have a low pass automated going from about 12 kilohertz all the way down to like 8 kilohertz. And this is because throughout the later half of the song, you can really hear that the ride cymbal is getting hit really hard around the toms. So in order to prevent that ride cymbal from creating hefty bleed and popping every time one of the toms is hit, I just lowered the high end so that a lot of the washiness of that cymbal is out of the toms. But because I have that 4.7 kilohertz where the resonance of the cymbal isn't as intense, but the stick hit on the toms is, it worked out a lot better that way. So if I hadn't done that, it would sound like... And every time you heard that in context, it would sound ridiculous. It would sound like the cymbals were getting louder every time the toms hit, and we really don't want that. So I automated that so that whenever the rides are getting hit, it basically cuts out the high end of the rides. Alright, and next I also compressed it just enough that it would create a nice pumpy tom sound for a modern pop style song. Slower attack and release than usual, like 45 milliseconds with a slower release so that it kind of pumps a little bit more. Just enough to be noticeable. Alright, so now that we've got that, what did I do to the drum bus? Well, I used this Volco processor that's it's a basic fixed band EQ that has 160 hertz, 650 hertz, 2.5 kilohertz, and an air band as well as a sub band. So this is really interesting because you'll hear a massive difference in it with and without. So starting with, definitely hear that it sounds really nice with it, but without, it loses a lot of that life and has a lot of that flub in the 600 range. But you really get some life and crack out of that entire kit with the boosted sub and the boosted airband, which the airband is a selectable switch, so you can choose to set it to 2.5 kilohertz, 5 kilohertz, 10 kilohertz, 24 kilohertz, 20 kilohertz, and 40 kilohertz respectively. I have it set to 10 kilohertz right now because that's about where I have the cutoff on my overheads and my toms. On top of that, I also have this compressor set. It's the free Andres Modern Poffis. It's set to a ratio of about 4. It's got a threshold, in the middle. And it's got an attack of 30 milliseconds, and a recovery of about 0.1 millisecond. So it's really a lot slower attack, faster recovery. Sort of like you would have on an SSL channel, or that I would have on an SSL channel probably. Notice it never really goes past 4 dB of gain reduction. Without. Fifth. Creates a sense of movement within the kit. Alright, so they also gave me a room mic, which sounded pretty good. But it was also very crushed by itself. So what I did was, I EQ'd it a little bit to get rid of some of the harshness in the cymbals. Again, I don't really want that much over 12K, so I just had a high shelf at -4 dB at around 8K, but then boosted around 5K. I also got rid of some of the flub at 400 hertz, and I passed it around 80 hertz. I don't want this room doing a ton, I just want it there for more effect than anything else. And for that very reason, I kind of crushed it with compression over here. With a fast tack, fast release. Almost like parallel compression, but directly on the room mic, so that whenever it got a little bit over, it would just crush it right back down. Keep the level really consistent. On top of that, I also added room reverb for the drums. So if you look here, I've got the entire drum folder and the room both sending to this reverb. This reverb's pretty nice sounding, I think. If you want to crank it up, you can hear it a lot better. It's definitely a longer reverb, at 1.6 seconds total. It's a hall reverb. Epic Verb, by the way, is free, as are all the plugins. So it's got a little bit of damping, got a longer reverb time in the low end over here, got a couple early reflections, and I'm cutting just a little bit of 400 hertz or thereabouts, and boosting a little bit around 500 hertz. Just, again, to mimic that room sound that it already had from the room mic, but as if it was going into, or as if the other drum's going into it. So I kind of want it to blend with the actual room mic. I also have it low passed at, again, around like 8 kilohertz and high passed at around 100 hertz because I just want as much body out of this verb as possible. And then with the drums, I lowered it until it was just noticeable. But without it, it feels like it's missing something. That's how it should be. So, from there, I decided to deal with the low end of things. And by that, I mean the bass guitar and the bass Moog. So, on the bass, which sounds great, by the way, you've got this long, sustaining boom, 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 boom. So immediately I know that just by looking at this waveform, it's going to get really loud over here, but it's really quiet over here. So to cut down on as many dynamics as possible, without killing the dynamic feel of it, I passed it up to almost 60 hertz because a lot of that's just flub that you're not going to really need. What's going to become overwhelming once it gets to the loud parts. And I'm putting this into a compressor, so, it really shouldn't be pumping it in some parts, but not others. That would just sound like an inconsistent bass line. So I cut 150 hertz where there was a loudish frequency that was really affecting the overall sound without adding to the tone of the bass. And also at around 500 hertz where there was an added woofy frequency, especially in the louder parts, that was really blowing it up in the compression. So I low passed it to about 3,800 hertz because there was nothing over that except air and noise. So with and without. It's a little bit more scooped now, but also a little bit more focused. So to account for all the dynamics in this, I used a leveling amplifier or an optical compressor, so to speak, in the modern series of Antris plugins. I had a lot of peak reduction, and I pumped up the gain so that it would be a good level for the rest of the song. So now it's this quiet over here, and it's still dynamic over here, but when it hits the really high peaks, it's still manageably within the same range of dynamics, so that it can stay at reasonably the same level. And then, just so that I had good clarity in the low end without eating up a ton of headroom, I have sidechained a compressor to the drum bus so that when the low end of the drum bus over here with the detector input set to auxiliary and this sending to tracks 3 and 4 on the input of the bass track, it's listening to the drum bus, but it's only compressing when the low end from 0 hertz to 120 hertz goes above this threshold. And it's doing so reasonably quickly with a slow release. You'll see that every now and again it cuts down by about 1 to 2 dB. That's so that there's 1 to 2 more dB of headroom whenever the kick really hits or the low toms really hit. That way I don't get a ton of pumping all over the place when I try to compress the overall mix. Same with the bass Moog, which I did the exact same things with. Just literally copied, except pushing up on 2 kilohertz so that you can get more body of it, so you get more of that character, that tone out of the Moog. I cut way more 300 hertz this time, and a little bit more on 60 because that's where the frequencies were worse. And high passed and low passed at all the same places. Again, I'm just treating this like a bass, like any other. Same with the leveling amp, although this one's really consistent already. I was just trying to get a little bit more gain out of it. And the sidechain compression. This one's hitting a little bit harder because this is a section where the bass and the toms really pick up a lot. So I'm getting anywhere from 1 to 3 dB of gain reduction on this, and that's totally okay. So now that I've gone over the drums and the bass, time to get to the melodic elements. First was this Moog, which I started by making it pan with a transient auto panner set to pan 60 degrees left, 60 degrees right, or 60% left, 60% right, depending on what kind of step size I was looking at. And right now it's going from left to right, bouncing, starting left, moving right, more and more, and then bouncing back left. Every time there's a good transient with 130 millisecond pauses in between. Now, there's a lot of settings here, and if anybody wants that explained, just let me know. But the whole point is that I'm getting it to pan left and right automatically. I could do the very same thing by just drawing in pan curves, basically, on automation tracks like this one. So after I decided to pan it, I added a delay. And this is actually the reason why I used this auto pan, so that I could automate it before the delay, so that the delay would actually stay super stereo without moving the delay if I were to pan the entire track. I could also probably do the same thing by panning pre-effects in Reaper, but I also like the automatic panning. So this delay makes a huge difference. It's the Sanford delay. I honestly just messed with it until I got a decent sound with a little bit of feedback and a low pass filter on it of about 1.5 kilohertz. I actually didn't have sync on this time because I wanted it to have more of a organic feel and less of a metronomic feel. So after that, I decided to throw on Nasty VCS, which is again one of my favorite free channel strips from Variety of Sound. Immediately you'll notice it's a lot louder. I increased the input gain, increased the saturation. I passed it up to about just under 100 hertz. And then cranked up around 1K and around 3K, while also boosting and cutting at the same time at around 170 hertz, so that the low end of that creates a resonant peak at about 170. This way it can gel with the other stuff where I've been cutting around 150 to 170 and keep that nice Moog fundamental without stepping on the bass. Notice how I cut the others so that it would have room instead of just boosting this. I'm also using a moderately fast attack and an extremely slow release, an LA style release, so that it stays way more consistent and it kind of vibrates with the instrument over here. I'm also boosting around the air band of 8K this time because I thought this really needed it. So with and without, It's now way brighter, way more harmonic content, and has a lot of the tone that you would expect of a Moog. So up next is the piano, which is a fun little instrument to mix. So with the piano, which goes throughout the entire song, I've got a lot of stuff going on. Starting with Saturn, which is acting like a console, which I'm basically just driving the signal into, because it sounded very virtual instrument-ish. Having this here makes it feel as though it's going through a much more classical analog board, which is what I want. And I EQ'd it using Mellow Muse's EQ1A, the free edition. So what I did here was I boosted the low end at around 300 hertz. I cut a little bit of around what felt like 400 to 500 hertz, because again, there's a lot of mid-heavy stuff going on in this song right now, with a smaller bell curve, so that I'm only cutting like maybe 2 to 3 dB of a more surgical bell. And next, I had about 1 dB increase at around 5 kilohertz, 4 kilohertz, because honestly, without it, it just felt a little bit less bright and in your face, which is kind of what I thought it would be mixed like. Again, boosting around 2 to 3 dB at about 8 kilohertz, because when I was mixing this, my first instinct was pop music, not indie trip hop with a dark Boston vibe. So I also put on Thrill Seeker XTC Black Edition from Variety of Sound, and oh my goodness, I drove it a little bit, increased the mojo, and the stereo field came alive. So I used this opportunity to boost the low end again, so that you can really feel that low end fundamental. Also boost mid-range around 1K, and the air band at around 10K. Now if you hear that low, that mid, and that high boost all very focused, without it, it still sounds kind of not real. It sounds kind of like a MIDI piano. But with these boosts, it sounds way more like something somebody probably recorded and just brightened up. It's got a little bit more drive, a little more saturation, a little bit more mojo. So from there, I used the Kehrhouse Classic Delay with a low cut of 100 hertz and a high cut to about 11K. Usually I'd go way lower on high cut because I like dark sounding delays, but on this piano track, it just sounded really good this way. And it's ever just so slightly blended in, as if you're in the room with it. It's nice. It's got a ping pong. It's really low quality, actually, on the quality knob. And it's only got 1/4 sync. So, I think it sounds great. But with that, I immediately after that, which I very rarely send a delay into a compressor, but I did a multi-band compressor where I cranked the gain over here on the high band to get some of that air into the track. So that you can really hear the delay a lot more, as if it's like the piano striking harder in a room, which I thought was pretty good. I also compressed every band just a little bit, but especially the low end band, I compressed harder so that when it gets really dynamic, it really tames that low end by like 3 or 4 dB, but is consistently around 2 dB of gain increase. So in the lower sections, you have a little bit more of that low end. You can really feel the low end resonate more with that multi-band compressor on, taming the lows, but also pumping them up a little bit. Same with the mids. I actually had had the low mids tamed a little bit harder from about 200 hertz to 1000 hertz. After that, I used old school reverb, which sounds pretty good. It just gave it the illusion of a large hall. Very wide, more damped in the high end for sure, so it's just a darker sounding reverb. But I definitely wanted a very stereo sounding piano. So, up next is the vocals. Now, these are the most important part of a song, easily, and thankfully, these are really good.
Doesn't anybody wonder what's behind them? 'Cause we had lots of last words.
First of all, with the main vocal track, I boosted just a little bit of the high end, about 12 kilohertz, to give it that airy pop vocal feel. Same with a boost at 1.5 by about 1 dB. Now this is Matt B's B Happy 550, which is kind of like an AP emulation, or at least that's what it kind of sounds like. And I boosted actually in the low end at 260 to get some intimacy out of the vocal. And I took a low shelf at 90 hertz and I lowered it by about 3 dB. So it sounds pretty good, I think.
It's not so easy to run for your life and remain here. We are both dead if we stay, but together.
So it's just making his voice a little bit more full of character and will probably stand out better in the mix. I also have him going through another sort of LA2A style compressor, and I think it fits really well with this vocal, especially with the slower delivery.
Life and remain here. We are both dead if we stay, but together I think it'd be pain. Press us.
It actually just makes it sound more expensive, in my opinion, which I know is a weird way to explain that, but so it is. Next up, we have the background vocals during the chorus, which really need to blend well. So what I did was I took an EQ, bumped down all the frequencies that I was boosting on the other track, and high passed, but also boosted around the high end so that it was more of an airy vocal. I also used automatic doubling, which is by Vacuum Sound, and it basically just creates a stereo pseudo effect where it delays one side by about 29 milliseconds, which is still within the realms of the Haas effect. So it gives it a doubled sound. So it sounds as if there's multiple. I then took a chorusing effect from Carehouse, with a really short range, short rate, mild to mid depth or percentage of chorus, and mixed it at about a rate of 1.2 to 0.82, which really doesn't mean much, but it's almost 1-to-1. I then took the exact same amp for the vocal to compress it about the same. Added a slapback delay so that it created this almost eerie effect in the background of the vocal. And when he says stay, it's kind of harsh on the S. So I used Lisp, which is a great de-esser, but you'll hear the difference right here. So it really cuts down on that S just enough. Now, with them both set up to be sent into the vocal bus,
life and remain here. We are both dead if we we stay, but
it's a very effective doubling. And so what I did was I tried to get them to blend just a little bit more. I used Boot EQ to boost the high end and drive it into a vintage sounding tube. Also cutting a little bit around with a small, with a not wide, in other words, a narrow curve at around 800 hertz or so, and cutting also at around 200 at 2 kilohertz, because I think the condenser they used for this was just a little bit nasally sounding. So here's with and without.
life and remain
Without.
here. We are both dead if we stay, but
It's especially noticeable during the R.
We are both dead if we stay. We are both dead if we stay. We are both dead if we stay. We are.
You can really hear that boxiness leave the voice and also give it a little bit more tightness around the high end to give it more of an airy quality. And focusing in on that intimate warmth, but also that brightness. So up next, I used Ferric EDS, great little tape machine, to tame some of the dynamics again and saturate the heck out of it with a slow recovery.
Life and remain here. We are both dead if we stay.
And to give it that saturated tape feel, which I love. So I also used Modern 7th Sine, which is kind of like an 1176. And check out. This is what it does.
It's not so easy to run for your. It's not so easy. Life and remain here. We are both dead if we stay.
It actually makes them sound like they're more blended, as if the main vocal is right in front of the vocal that's supposed to be behind it, you know? So even though I'd usually use this on individual channels, I decided to use it on the whole vocal bus to really blend that stuff. Because, man, does it sound good, in my opinion. And I used a quicker release and an almost really fast attack, like around 5.5 on the 1 to 7 scale. So then, all we needed left was de-essing.
Life and remain here. We are both dead if we stay.
Because without that, that more intimate vocal, that more upfront and tight, direct sounding vocal with the 1176 sound would be a way harsher.
In here, we are both dead if we stay, but together we are both dead if we stay.
That way you get a smooth sounding pop vocal. Alright, last up for effects I used the spaceship delay, and the only things being sent to this is the vocal bus. This is actually one of my presets called the Filzio Special, where it's got a lot of low cuts, low cut, high cut, so that you really focus in on those mids, really drive it through the tube saturation, tape delay it so that it's got like already a kind of beat up sound, and then just enough feedback and cross feedback that really maintains like a sense of distance, as if it's going for a little bit longer than it should. And just enough spring reverb to make it feel as if the delay is far enough back that it's not really, not quite on the same plane of existence as the vocals. So hearing that with the rest of the vocals.
Life and remain here. We are both dead if we stay, but together I think it'd be painless. So give me your heart, your hope, and your.
It makes a huge difference to the spaciousness of it all. So, with that, this is how the mix currently sounds, and then I'll walk through the mastering chain. So already we've got a pretty good setup going. Let's check span over here and see what can be done. So while yes, it's pretty warm over here, it's also decently flat across the board, which is good. We want that. We want some sense of dynamics maintained, and we want that level of flatness. But it's missing something, and I'll tell you what it's missing. It's missing a little bit of brightness and a little bit of sub-frequency. So even though it's got a good amount of 40 hertz and 160 hertz, I also want those subharmonics and a lot of that air being boosted. Now, I boosted it at 20 kilohertz, which you wouldn't think makes a difference because we can only hear up to that, but check out the difference it makes.
We had lots of last words that turned into lost evenings. But everyone who listens to this story can never believe me. It's not so easy to run for your...
It gives it just enough to push it into that territory of sounding massively wide and bright and in your face. And honestly, I really liked how it worked for the percussion of the drums.
We had lots of last words.
So next, I used some tape, again with heavy dynamics, but a faster recovery this time.
We had lots of last words that turned into lost evenings. But everyone who listens to this story can never...
So even though I adjusted the output trim so that it would be the same level gain matched, it conveniently has this huge saturated feel as if the low end and the high end are really gelling and creating this like massive movement.
We had lots of last words that turned into lost evenings.
You can feel the drums hit
Last words that turned into
tape.
we had lots of last words that...
It really smooths things out, but also makes it feel like it hits harder. So with that, I took in consideration the fact that this mix was very warm, very fat, very low heavy, because again, that's how it was meant to be.
Words fail
So I
to
multi-beam
ever
compressed.
impress us.
Now, it doesn't seem like it's doing much except boosting the low and mid right now, but once it gets to the louder sections, it really helps control for the dynamics.
Your life remain here. We are both dead if we stay.
Sometimes going up to 2, maybe even 3 decibels of gain reduction. So the fact that I have about half that boosted means that I'm just keeping that level a little bit more consistent throughout the song without letting it get to the point where it oversaturates and floods the entire song with bass.
Without a broken life behind.
Same with the low mids. I like how they sound in the context of this mix,
Broken.
but during a lot of the tom rolls and stuff, the low mids really boom outwards, but I liked how they sound in the toms alone. So I just compressed that band a little bit throughout the whole mix.
You were just that vessel of the oldest kind of lightning came to shatter.
So I think that's sounding pretty good. But what else can we do? Well, I'm getting a little bit more surgical with the EQ here, but I'm boosting just a tiny bit on the sides with a mid-side EQ at 2.5 kilohertz so that it creates a more wide-sounding mix. And you can especially hear it in the background vocals. You can hear that they get boosted ever so slightly, but also the cymbals do, and like everything just feels shiny around the sides. Creates a massive width. I also have a high pass around the sides at about 50 hertz with a slope of 18 dB, so the sides are really cleaned up a lot more. It contributes to getting more of a mono sound down the center. And up next, I have CS12M. Crazy good tool. Highly recommend. Great T-West plug. So, check the sides out on this. We're already getting close to the mix level that I want it to be when we finally master it. Close to the commercial level that the other one was at. So what am I doing to it that it changes the sound entirely? Well, I added a level 2 body function and punch function over here, with the clarity being in the low end, and I monoized it up to about 140 hertz. So this is just adding some punch and body, so to speak, which has transient emphasis and low end emphasis. And keeping the clarity in the low end means that it's gonna, focus more on an attack in the low end and less sustain in the low end. I believe that's what it sounds like to me. So I'm also boosting it about 1.6K over here in the EQ section and high passing to about 35 hertz of the entire mix. Because, again, I want to have as much low end that's audible as possible. Meaning I'm going to have to cut out some of that less audible low end to make headroom for the rest of it. So even though I'm cutting some of the low end, it feels tighter. Now I'm also doing New York compression and saturation. New York compression basically just meaning parallel compression of the entire bus. You can hear how it's really pumping because it's all crushed and whatnot. Ooh boy, does that sound crushed. But blended with the song,
it's not so easy.
It really makes the transients pop. Same with the saturation, it's just adding a little bit of harmonic content. And the 40K aero peak shelf is just like what Q3D is doing if I were to have pumped it up to 40K instead of 20K. So I'm basically doing incremental high-end increases throughout the entire song so that not everything gets harsh at once and it's all in different areas to create this high-end sheen effect. Now, after that, since that's all I'm doing in this program, I then add a limiter.
Together I think it'd be painless, so give me your
Now what I'm doing here is compressing it with mid-side compression and at a really slow attack of like 1 second to or 100 milliseconds or whatever that is to almost instantaneous release at 1.5, a ratio of 1.5 to 1. And I'm just pumping in the gain at about 2 until I see that it's only compressing the either the mid or the side band. I believe it's the sides because I think the side's louder. But it really evens out the stereo imaging of the song so it doesn't feel too wide, but it also doesn't feel too mid-heavy. Next, I'm going into a peak limiter with also mid-side. Because stereo image is the name of the game in this one, with a threshold type of 2, which I thought sounded the richest, personally, as if it didn't pump a lot and it didn't clip hard. So it sounded like a decent form of limiting to me. I also have a high floor limiter on because I don't want it to be too bright that it becomes unappealing. And during the brightest parts of the song, it clamps in just a little bit on the high floor. That it's not too bright. And then I just have it set to a ceiling of negative 0.2 dB with a fast protection. So, overall, I think the mix sounds really good. Comparing it to the other one, you can definitely get a feel for how different they are spatially and how, while this one sounds really dark and warm, which was their version,
among the footsteps that we had been chasing, so run for your. We are both dead if we stay, but together I think it'd be painless, so give me your.
And it's peaking around negative 9 dB RMS, and mine about the same, but mine has a completely different feel, which is why I thought this was probably the most interesting version I've done so far of the mix fix, because what I did this time, going into it blind, I got to see how they'd intended it to sound versus how I made it sound just by going in. And I made some of the same mix decisions that he wanted to, actually. I made the cymbals darker, I got a lot of the spatial effects down, and I focused on the low end a lot. But honestly, it turned out much different. So just listen to this build up before it ends and then go out and buy their EP because it sounds really good and the music is fantastic. Links in the description. My version. I hope you guys enjoyed. Definitely give Able Days a shout out and let them know that I sent you. Thanks a billion. Bye bye.